Steve Gardner does a great job covering baseball for USA Today. Kind enough to join us for a couple moments. How you been, pal?
Good, Rich. How about you?
I'm doing real well. Appreciate a couple moments as always. And so Asher, correct me if I'm wrong, Rule 5, I think he was also the same as he was a Rule 5 pick, correct?
I believe so. He's not a familiar name, certainly, even to diehard Phillies fans, other than the fact that he was in that big trade.
Yes, same PEDs, by the way, that the other player got nailed for as well. Stump.
Right, Daniel Stump earlier in the season.
Well, I tell you,
it's weird. But baseball, it's cracking down, and I guess the tests are a little bit more sophisticated now, to where maybe guys that tried to slip through are getting caught when in previous years maybe they were able to slide by and not be detected. So I guess that's a good thing for baseball, and as soon as we continue to try and get those performance enhancing drugs out of the game, that's a good goal to aim for.
Phils have dropped 6 of 7, 17 of 22. You're starting to see the real Phillies team, and that's okay because they're still a relatively young team. And we talked about before how they handle the Ryan Howard situation, and I understand you got to give Tommy Joseph at bats, but I go back to a conversation, and this kind of ties into my question. We always talk about teams that are rebuilding, have young arms, have young prospects, assets, however you want to deem it. I go back a couple years ago with the whole Matt Laporta thing. He was so untouchable, and everyone was saying, you can't touch this kid, and he's not even in baseball anymore. He's out of baseball, and he was supposed to be the next, big power slugger, the first baseman and whatnot with the Brewers and everything, and then got dealt to Cleveland. I guess the thing is, let's calm down with Joseph. He's had a nice little run here with some of these home runs, but it's still relatively young in his career. When you look at the way the Phillies are currently constructed, and you see some of the young prospects, you see some of the young arms, if they were at 500, say, or a little more competitive, look, they had a great start to the season for all the talent that they assembled, but come trade deadline, if they were still hovering around 500, still competitive in the NL East, still maybe 5, 6, 7 games out of that wild card spot, do you think they would be buyers or sellers?
I think that you've got to take the long-term approach, and I think that's one of the things that teams sometimes, when they are rebuilding, they get a little too excited when things go maybe ahead of schedule, and to make a move in the short term that affects them in the long term before they've reached the point, I think is a mistake. So it would be, I think, for the Phillies, if they were to start trying to think they were competitive. When you look at the teams that are above them in the National League, I mean, there's some really good teams. So it's probably for the best, even though it's tough to watch as a Phillies fan, after such a great start and get your hopes up to see the team, sort of fall down to where it's really its level should be. Though it's disappointing, it's probably the best thing in the long term because it keeps you from getting that false sense of security. And, I think another year like this, where you can build on some of the success. I mean, there have been some successes and some good success stories. I think you get a few more of those in there next year with another crop of young players coming up from the minors. Then you can start to think about it. Maybe next year at this time, we could actually be maybe seriously having this conversation.
Right. Yeah, it's a good point. Again, a couple minutes with USA Today's Steve Gardner. Rich Quinones here, 27 past the 1 o'clock hour. Talk about injuries, always crippling teams, and you look at what's going on with the Mets and obviously the loss now of David Wright. You still have to consider the fact he's still relatively young at 33, but some of these injuries with the herniated disc and now the neck injury, I mean, it just looks like his time might be drawn to an end with the Mets. I can't see another team this year in baseball that was or has been decimated with injuries as far as Mets, especially in front of the infield, which kind of begs this question. Okay, you saw what Colorado did with Jose Reyes. I understand that the Mets and Reyes had a horrible parting of the ways, if you will, a bad breakup, bad divorce. But my goodness, I mean, basically, if they make a call right now, it's not like it's going to cost them anything.
That's true, and especially, the Rockies have designated Reyes for assignment. They're going to be on the hook for the rest of his contract. So a team that would, in fact, pick him up after he probably passes through waivers and becomes a free agent in another 10 days wouldn't really have to pay a thing. And if with the way the Mets have gone, the one thing, though, I mean, the guy that has done well for them has been Neil Walker at second base.
Yep.
Asdrubal Cabrera has been fine at shortstop. So, it's been the corners, some of the outfield where they had a lot of injuries, and I don't know that Reyes can really help them there. So I just don't see the Mets front office going back and revisiting that, just like I don't see Reyes doing the same thing in Toronto.
Yeah.
I think there's really, even though Troy Tulowitzki's been hurt and they've kind of piecemealed it together, I don't see him going back there either. In fact, in terms of contenders, I can't find a single contender right now that can use Jose Reyes unless he's going to change positions and be a utility guy or maybe even an outfielder. And as I said on Twitter earlier this week, he needs to sort of reinvent himself like Ian Desmond has this season if he's going to be in the major leagues again.
It speaks volumes, too, when a franchise is eating that type of money. By the way, he'd be able to get picked up for a prorated portion of the MLB minimum salary, which is right around $500,000. So, again, you're right. It might be a moot point.
But change for
exactly. You mentioned the Mets and the way Walker's been playing, giving them a big lift. We know Granderson's still notoriously, slow starter, starting to come on a little bit. How about Syndergaard the other night against the Pirates? Strikes out 11. I mean, we talk about that young crop of pitching with Matz and DeGrom and Syndergaard, and of course Harvey starting to figure it out a little bit. I mean, is the starting rotation gonna have to carry the Mets here?
Oh, without a doubt. And I think we talked a little bit about it towards the beginning of the season. That offense, if Yoenis Cespedes is not hitting home runs at the rate essentially that he did last year, that's not really a very good offense. And, Walker's helped them a good deal, but they can be prone to a lot of slumps. And I was up there in New York and saw Jameson Taillon of the Pittsburgh Pirates in his second major league start no-hit the Mets through 6 innings. The lineup that they're throwing out there right now, it's just been so devastated with injuries to Wright and Lucas Duda and Travis d'Arnaud. They're just a shell of what they could be and what they were last year. And you're right, the pitching, if it's not beyond excellent, I don't know that the Mets really have a shot, really, at making the playoffs, considering some of the other teams in the NL.
We knew how good the Cubs were going to be, and you and I have gone back and forth over the last several years with the Washington Nationals. They're playing great baseball. I mean, it seems as though it's starting to come together. They've won 8 out of 10. Jason Wirtz with a couple big hits here and there. You already know that they have the power numbers with Harper. They have the pitching. What's interesting to me is I'm looking at the Cubs, and they're starting to come back down to reality a little bit. I still think right now the Cubs are the best team in baseball, certainly in my estimation the best team in the NL. But I look at Washington, and I'm also quietly looking at what San Francisco is doing. I mean, they're just it seems as though the Giants are kind of flying under the radar. If there was a team that would really contend against the Cubs, I know it's early. We're not even at the midway point, so to speak, but who would it be in the NL?
I think that series, the Nationals and Cubs series, was just fantastic baseball. I mean, that was a postseason caliber, the way they went back and forth in that 3-game set in Washington. But you're right. I think that the Giants are a team that is lurking there. And when you've got the pitching staff that they have with the 1-2 punch, Madison Bumgarner, Johnny Cueto, and then Jeff Samardzija, who can be very good. And I think one of the things, too, that's kind of lost in the shuffle here is that the Giants' hitting has not been very good at all. I mean, Buster Posey is having kind of a subpar season. They've got some good hitters on that team up and down the lineup, and if they start to come around, getting Hunter Pence back later on in the season, that's going to help them tremendously. They could make this very interesting and throw all the even year people coming out there and then saying it's going to be the Giants' year, it's destiny and all that. They've got a good team. That's the one thing that helps them and will make them a force come October. It could be a fun postseason there in the National League because I love the Cubs' depth. I think the Nationals are fantastic, and Pittsburgh is very good too, for that matter. So there are a lot of good teams, and And you can't count out the Dodgers with Kershaw, even though they need a little bit more supporting cast as well.
And before we start to close out, by the way, Johnny Cueto, his 10th win of the season. According to Elias, the 4th Giant since the team moved to San Francisco since 1958 with 1 loss or fewer at the time of his 10th win. Lincecum, the great Marichal, and, of course, Gaylord Perry. So Cueto putting up very impressive numbers. Speaking of impressive numbers, I had this conversation with someone the other day that was a former scout, and he mentioned to me, he goes, you watch Colorado Rockies at all? And I said, no, I don't. And they said, do you see that one kid that's hitting homers left and right? And I turned around and I started to laugh, and I was like, what are you talking about? He hit 40 last year. I mean, Nolan Arenado, I mean, it's like people are acting as though this kid just came out of nowhere. He hit 42 last year with Colorado. He's going to be able to probably hit 50 this year in that ballpark. But how about the season he's having thus far?
You know, as great a season as he had last year, and you mentioned the 42 homers, 130 RBIs, he's actually having a better season this year. I mean, you look at his batting average, his on-base percentage, his slugging percentage, all of those are up over last year. And, yeah, just because the Rockies are not one of the powerhouse teams, he does get overlooked. But I think when you make a list of the top 10 players in baseball right now, I think Nolan Arenado has to be in there, certainly for not only his bat, but a fantastic defensive third baseman. He's got the whole package at age 25. We're going to be talking about him. You know, if he's not getting the recognition right now, he certainly will in the years to come.
Last one for you, and we've talked about Pete Rose for a lot of years on the air, and I think Pete Rose is actually dead on in this regard. This is not a knock on Ichiro. He's a Hall of Famer. We know that. But do I really need to see articles 42, 57? I mean, honestly, it's almost as though we're going to start to count other numbers and other stats from the Venezuelan league or Japanese ball. It just seems as though you're kind of, you can honor Ichiro, but I also think it does a little bit of a disservice of Pete Rose's career hits record. That's just my opinion.
I think so, and I think it's sort of the similar treatment that people give Barry Bonds because they don't like Pete Rose personally, or they don't like Barry Bonds personally. And so to do that, it's sort of reflected in trying to diminish their accomplishments when, you know, you look at those two guys and they dominated those categories like no one else. I mean, Pete Rose could get hits for years and years and years until he was, you know, practically limping out onto the field. Amazing career, and I think you're exactly right. Ichiro, I think what we should be focusing on, he's going to be very close to the 3,000 hit barrier by the All-Star break. You know, 3,000 career hits. That used to be something to be celebrated, and why anybody wants to add on the Japanese hits, you know, hits in that league. It doesn't make it. Sure, yes, he's done that over his career, but other major leaguers have gone to Japan. You know, Tuffy Rhodes hit 460 some home runs in Japan. You know, if he were to hit 260 more here in MLB, would we be talking about him in the same breath as Hank Aaron and Barry Bonds? No, we would not. So it's a different game. It's a great accomplishment. He was great in Japan. He was great here. I think we should just be, you know, not trying to compare the two because statistically they're just not the same.
Did you just throw out a Carl Derek Tuffy Rhodes reference?
I sure did. You know, the all-time American home run leader in Japanese baseball.
Yeah, that's right. And the native of Cincinnati, Ohio. How ironic for that, right? With Pete Rose as well. Good stuff as always, my friend. I appreciate it. Thanks a lot for the time. You know, we'll talk next week. Always good stuff.
Sounds great, Rich. Always a pleasure.
You got it. Steve Gardner. Great follow on Twitter as well.